All right, let's talk about an antibiotic that's basically a secret agent, a saboteur that sneaks behind enemy lines to take down some of the most stubborn bacterial infections out there. Its name is Cefotaxime, and it's a major player in modern medicine. Today, we're diving into the story of how it works.
This is really the biggest question in the fight against infectious diseases. We're locked in this constant arms race with bacteria. We invent a new drug, and sooner or later, they evolve to fight back. So when our older, classic antibiotics started to fail, we desperately needed a new plan, a much smarter weapon.
And that new weapon came from a class of drugs called third-generation cephalosporins, with cefotaxime leading the charge. Now, this wasn't just a small tweak or a minor upgrade. No, this was a massive leap forward in our ability to take on serious infections.
I like to think of it like this. If penicillin was the original foot soldier in this war, cefotaxime is like the elite special forces unit. It was literally engineered with a different structure to be effective against bacteria that had already figured out how to chew up and spit out those earlier antibiotics. And here's a key term you've got to know to understand its power: bactericidal. See, cefotaxime doesn't just, slow the bacteria down or press pause on the infection. Not at all. It actively kills them. It's designed to completely wipe out an infection by making the bacterial cells literally burst and die. So, how in the world does it pull off this microscopic assassination? Well, the strategy is pretty brilliant. It targets a fundamental weakness in how a bacterium builds itself. It's a total sabotage mission. Cefotaxime hones in on these key proteins. They're called penicillin binding proteins, or PBPs for short. Think of these PBPs as the construction crew for the bacterial cell wall. Cefotaxime comes in, binds to them, and boom, the whole construction project just stops. The bacteria can't build their protective armor anymore, and without that strong wall, the bacterium can't handle its own internal pressure. It fills with water, swells up, and just pops. It's a total takedown from the inside out. And here's the other really clever part. Bacteria had developed their own counterattack against our older drugs. They started producing these enzymes called beta-lactamases, which act like tiny molecular scissors, just chopping antibiotics to pieces. But cefotaxime's chemical structure is like a shield. It's resistant to a lot of those enzymes, so it can actually get its job done without being destroyed first. But, like any specialist, cefotaxime isn't a silver bullet for everything. It has a very specific hit list of bacteria that it's designed to be most effective against. So let's take a look at its main targets. So its real strength is against what we call gram-negative bacteria. These are guys like E. coli and Klebsiella. It's also incredibly effective against the bacteria that cause really nasty stuff like meningitis and gonorrhea. But on the flip side, it has its kryptonite. It doesn't work against certain superbugs like MRSA or other tough ones like Pseudomonas. And this is exactly why it's so critical for doctors to figure out precisely what's causing an infection before they choose the weapon. Now this is one of cefotaxime's superpowers. The blood-brain barrier is this incredibly selective fortress that protects our central nervous system. Very few drugs can get past it, but cefotaxime is one of the few that can, and that ability is an absolute game-changer for treating certain life-threatening infections. And because it can get past that fortress, it gets deployed in some of the most high-stakes medical situations you can possibly imagine. Situations where an infection is threatening the body's main control center. This is really where cefotaxime earns its keep. For bacterial meningitis, an infection right around the brain, it's a top choice. It's used to fight sepsis, which is a massive, overwhelming infection in the bloodstream. It's a go-to for severe pneumonia that people might pick up in the hospital. And it's even used to prevent infections from starting in the first place after a big surgery. Now, because we're talking about such serious infections, you're not going to find cefotaxime as a pill at your local pharmacy. Your gut just doesn't absorb it well, so it has to be given directly through an IV or an injection. This is a medicine that's reserved for serious, in-hospital care. Of course, any weapon this powerful comes with some risks. You have to expect a little collateral damage. The same strength that makes cefotaxime so good at its job can also lead to some side effects. The good news is, for most people, it's handled pretty well. The most common thing you might see is some gut upset, like diarrhea. A little less common, you might get an allergic reaction, like a skin rash. And then in pretty rare cases, it can cause more serious problems, like a drop in your blood cell counts. Now, for anyone out there with a known penicillin allergy, this is really important to know. There's about a 5 to 10% chance of what's called a cross-allergic reaction. Basically, it means if you have a bad allergy to penicillin,
You might also react to cefotaxime, so doctors have to be really careful in those cases.
And this right here is one of the biggest warnings with powerful antibiotics. Because cefotaxime is so strong, it doesn't just kill the bad bacteria. It can also wipe out all the good bacteria living in our gut that help keep us healthy. And when that happens, it can open the door for a really dangerous bacterium called C. difficile to take over, which can cause a very severe, sometimes even life-threatening infection.
Cefotaxime was an absolute hero for its time, a brilliant answer to the bacterial resistance of its day. But that arms race we talked about, it never stops. Bacteria are always evolving, and sure enough, some are already resistant to even this powerful drug. Which leaves us with a huge question: what comes next, and how are we going to stay one step ahead in this never-ending battle for our health?